I'm just going to show you quickly the process of what I do to chop a rear wing down or even chop a front wing down. It's not that complicated. You could pick up the tools for, I don't even know, $10 maybe at any hardware store. The main things you're going to need are a hacksaw, maybe some tape, some masking tape, probably like a pen or a pencil if you've got that. A tape measure would be good if you've got a tape measure. I've got one around here somewhere. And you probably want like a couple different coarsenesses of sandpaper, a couple of different grades of sandpaper. You want something thicker, like I've got a 120 grit here. This is an 80 grit. You probably don't need that. And then I've got some wet and dry paper too. I've got this 400 grit, which you can use dry, and then if you want it to be less grit, you can wet it down for a pretty smooth finish at the end. And I think that's far enough, at least for me. I don't really think it needs to be much smoother than that. So the main thing you need to do is decide on the shape you want the wing to be. I'm trying to copy shapes I've already done, like this shape here, something similar to this. The best bet is do one wingtip, put the tape on where it visually looks like you want to cut it off, and then get the tape measure and measure from a point, like maybe measure from this back hole, the center of this back hole, measure out to the very tip of where you cut off, like here, and this other side of where you cut off from somewhere else, like this other front hole, measure to here. And then just do the same thing on this side, put 2 marks with a pen, and then just draw a straight line across the end of the tip, put some masking tape on in the same place and cut along the line. That way you're going to end up with a symmetrical enough cut on either side. Honestly, like if you get close enough, it's fine. If you're like off by a millimeter or 2, it's going to make absolutely no difference. You're not going to be able to tell that you cut it different. So I already cut this side. Let's cut this side and I'll show you how it works. I usually just try and cut directly along the side of the masking tape like this. Just go slowly at first and score the back wing, so you're going to cut into a little trench. I've got it sitting flat on a table here on something like a piece of cloth that's a little bit soft to hold it in place, otherwise it slips around on a hard table. And then what you can do is make your hacksaw parallel to like the side of something straight, like this table. We know that this table is square, so make your cut parallel to the table. And you can also check if you're holding the hacksaw properly vertical, like straight on the vertical, by looking down the side of the table against your hacksaw. This is the super ghetto way to do something, but most people are going to be able to have access to these kind of tools, and it's not that crazy to do this. If you even have the tiniest bit of hand-eye coordination, you can do this. All right, so what I did there was bad. As you get towards the end, you should slow down a little bit, because the faster you go at the end, the more it's going to kind of rip up the edge of the carbon on the bottom side of where you're cutting. In this case, it didn't really make much difference. It's going to be sanded off, and this is a pretty thin wing anyway, but if you were cutting something thicker like a front wing, you should definitely slow down a little bit more than I did there. So we have these 2 sides cut off the same. The next thing I want to do is measure out the shape. I'm actually going to cut into the leading edge of the foil. I want to cut a shape. I want to cut a shape that looks like this one. It's the smaller version of the 2 that I've been riding, and it was a wing that did look like this originally, so it's quite easy. All I need to do is lay this wing over the top and also mark it with some masking tape. So I'm going to do that now. So as you can see, I've marked out this side as close as I need it to be. What I'm going to do next though is I'm actually going to measure how wide this piece is here and put a mark on the other side, just so I get this wing symmetrical. Because this wing, even though it looks pretty symmetrical, it also might not be symmetrical. So it's better to start with something that's more symmetrical, at least in theory. So now I just need to measure how wide this is at the cut, basically. Assuming that my cut was in the same spot, which probably isn't, but it'll be close enough. A good tip if you're using a tape measure, don't measure from this end part that moves around. This is like not precise at all. Measure from somewhere else on the tape measure, like somewhere that you can see, maybe the 3. Start from there and then measure outwards. 3.1 centimeters. Basically go to there. Get some more tape. Got the mark on the side that I can see, because if I'd put it directly on top I wouldn't see. And then try and make the point at the top in the middle in front of the hole. Now what we've got is something fairly symmetrical looking. I wouldn't trust these graphics they put on the wings, because sometimes they also don't put those on very symmetrically, so those can also throw you off a little bit sometimes, because you line it up with those symmetrically but then your wing ends up not symmetric. So always do your own measuring. Don't trust the graphics on the wing for visual representation of whether it's symmetrical. I'm going to do a double check just to see my measurements were good. 3.1, 3.1. All right. It started out the same at least. Probably by the end of this it's not going to be symmetrical, but let's cut this one out. This cut's a bit tougher because you don't really have much to push it on. If you had a vise at home, that would be ideal. A vise is a very valuable tool. If you have one maybe bigger tool that you're going to buy, at least I think buy a vise. A vise is a good tool. This one's pretty hard for me to hold horizontal, but I'm going to do my best bet. I'm at least going to hold both of them the same so that my cut ends up the same, and then later on when I chamfer either side to try and make the foil back to being correct, I'm going to at least start with a similar thing on both sides. So same as what you did cutting the tip off, you want to first just try and score it a little bit along the line that you want to cut. Yeah, so I'm cutting to just the inside of the sandpaper. Remember what you did on one side and then always repeat that on the other side. Actually, I've got one more new blade. What you want to do if you're cutting carbon, one of these hacksaw blades is going to get blunt, especially if it's a cheap, crappy blade like this. It's going to get blunt really quickly. I've already cut a few wings with this blade, so I'm going to switch out the blade and it's going to cut through a lot better. You can get lots of different hacksaw blades for different hardnesses and different types of metal. I didn't really have that luxury here. The shop just had this one blade, so it's just a cheap hardware store. I think most hacksaw blades are going to cut through carbon, so you might just need a couple of them because they're going to get blunt kind of quickly. Try and make sure when you put your blade in that it's horizontal, because with the way at least this cheap hacksaw tightens, it's pretty easy to make your blade angled, and you don't really want that. Sometimes just pulling in one way can make it easier to get it started. You might even want to just start one side a bit more first, go lightly. Alright, you should really be wearing a mask. Don't breathe this shit in. It's super bad for your lungs. So I'm just starting the second side. Trying to keep it horizontal. Slow and steady wins the race. If it takes you a while, there's no problem. Just the slower you go, probably the smoother it's going to be. Now I'm going to join up these two, try and get a more symmetric cut across the wing. You'll see that I don't actually have enough room on the blade to cut this full length how I'm doing it, but I'm just doing that to make sure the line is more straight and that my cuts are more similar, so when I meet up more in the middle, it's not all off. This side's going pretty good. Try and work from the other side a bit more now. This is getting tiring. If you had a bandsaw or something, it would be nice. If you keep the saw on more of an angle like this rather than straight up and down, you'll make sure that you're cutting a straighter line. I'm running out of space on this side, but to go a little bit more vertical. I'm getting close to the end here now, so as I was saying before, you want to slow down, make some pretty slow movements so you make the cut clean when it goes through the other side. All right, so there you go. One side cut off. That's how it looks. This wing actually has a core, which isn't ideal, but I don't know, the core seems pretty hard and I'll just work around that. So now what you need to do is do the other side the same. I'm not going to show you that. I'll get back to you after I've done that. So that second side was considerably harder to chop because this hacksaw blade got super blunt. Pretty much with a cheap blade like this, one of these cuts and your blade's going to be super blunt. But yeah, there you go. We've got the template cut now. That's definitely not the hard part. The hard part's going to be the sanding, especially if you're like me and you don't have an electric sander. An orbital is okay for this, but a little mouse sander would probably be best for something of this size and just trying to be a little bit more precise. I'm gonna sand it by hand, so yeah, we'll move on to that process and I'll show you what it's like. Basically, what you want to do is chamfer the edges because it's, as you can see, it's just square now because we cut it. But you need to try and return it to as close to possible as the foil shape it was to begin with. So with this wing, the bottom is rounded more to the top kind of flat surface. That's similar to what you'll find on most wings, but you'll actually find that it's sort of not that important if it has a foil on one side on the rear wing. It's more used as a stabilizer, and I've made many rear wings that have symmetrical foil top and bottom, and they still ride completely fine, especially behind a kite. So yeah, let's move on to the sanding process. Pretty rough. If you have a mouse sander or an orbital sander, or a belt sander or any kind of sanding tool, this is really going to be way easier. Doing it by hand is significantly harder, but you have the added benefit that you're not going to sand too much off and potentially risk screwing it up. But if I had my choice, I'd probably choose something like a little mouse sander, and for this kind of size of wing, that's going to be pretty easy, and it's going to be pretty quick. I suggest wearing a respirator if you have one. The sanding process is definitely where more of the dust is going to fly up. I don't have one, so I'm just going to wrap a shirt around my face. Better than nothing. Try and not breathe in too much dust. First step I think you should take is just going around the edges and just smoothing them out a little bit. Try and make the same kind of sanding along all the edges, just to make it a little bit cleaner for the next steps we're going to take. So I'll do that now. Alright, so I've gone around all the edges and just smoothed them off a little bit so they look cleaner. I don't suggest doing the very tips yet, because the tips are very thin and you want to be pretty precise with how you do that and how much you take off each side to make it symmetrical. So yeah, first step is just cleaning it up so it looks a bit like that. If you have another wing you haven't modified, or if you can take a picture of this wing before you modify it, you can check how the foil looks. Generally, these rear wings have more curve underneath. They're more foiled on the bottom section and flatter on the top. So I'm going to sand a bevel into the bottom side of both of the sides of the rear wing first, on the bottom of the foil. You need to make it round, so I think the easiest way to do that is symmetrically sand on each side a bevel, and then you make another bevel, then another bevel, and you kind of keep doing angles until you've got like 3 or 4 angles beveled, and then you can round it with a lesser coarse sandpaper. So I'm just going to start sanding the first bevel into the bottom side. Okay, so that's the start of what you need to do, which is basically making a very slight bevel, and then you just need to keep going from there, keep beveling, keep trying to make it round, and I'll keep showing you the steps as I go. But this isn't a quick job. This might take, I don't even know, an hour or two if you're hand sanding it. If you've got tools, as I said, this is going to be way quicker, but yeah, you just need to keep going. To help make it symmetrical, it's good to count how many strokes you're doing on each side, do a similar amount of strokes on each side, or maybe time how long you're sanding on each side with a similar repetition of strokes. You want to try and make it as symmetrical as possible, because although you can look at it and sort of see if it's symmetrical or not, it's also sometimes a little bit hard to tell once you start sanding down further and further. So repeating a similar process on both sides definitely helps keep it more symmetrical. If you don't have any tools, however, if you have a sanding block, ideally a proper sanding block, a piece of cork. I don't have that though, but I've got this random piece of wood. This is about as good as I can find. You can wrap the sandpaper around the piece of wood to help make a flat surface and to help make it easier to sand quicker and more efficiently. trying to keep both sides symmetrical and just sanding those bevels in to try and make a finished foil. You basically just want to keep sanding angles. So you make an angle here first, make an angle here next, make an angle on the other part that's sticking up, and just keep repeating that process. Okay, so it's not finished, but I just started rounding the bottom a bit then, as you could see, just to see how it's coming along and how the foil's taking shape. I still need to take more off, I still need to thin it out more, so I'm going to have to do more beveling on the top and the bottom. I really need to cut into the bottom a bit more because it's still, as you can see, it's still way too thick and too square to just round off like it is. So I need to try and eat away at a bit of the material on the bottom side. I think I need to try and angle this a lot more, so I'm going to just go nuts on it a bit and try and get stuck into it. As you can see, it's pretty tiring work. If I was sitting at a table or had this in a vise or locked down to the table, it would also be a lot easier. Doing it sitting here, just holding it, doesn't make it the easiest, but you can see we're getting there, slowly shaping it out, keeping it as symmetrical as possible. Just need to keep working. I think the thickness is getting there, but I still need to just keep angling, keep working on the angles. I might go back to the top now and do a little bit of the top to thin it out a little bit. We're getting to something pretty uniform and pretty nice looking. I'm going to round it off a bit more and just check how it looks. Alright, so I kind of like how this top is looking now. I'm going to start working on the bottom again. Alright, so I'm just rounding out this bottom side again to see how it's looking, how the thickness is looking. Try and keep it symmetrical. Right, so we're kind of getting somewhere, as you can see. It's looking pretty, getting closer. We're almost ready to move on to a different thickness of sandpaper. I'm going to go have a little bit of a break, but there's still more to do. So we're back day 2, took a little break, moved around the other side of the house, so I've got a table that I can work at. Working where I wasn't really that easy. I was mainly just working there to make less mess, but I'm going to clean it up out here anyway, so working at a table is definitely going to make this easier. As you can see, here's the one I copied, here's the one we're working on. It's getting closer. You can see it's still a bit flat along certain points of the leading edge. So I'm going to work now on this top section, try and roll this off a bit more. It's a bit flat here on these points, and this also needs to be chamfered a little bit more here to blend it in. So I'm going to work on this top side a little bit again now. So we've got the top foil section looking pretty good now. I'm going to start working from the underside again because I just need to match up those foils a little bit better. I think I'm almost ready to move to a different grade of sandpaper now. I've got it looking pretty symmetrical and almost in the shape I want it to look. So I'm going to move down to some 400 grit sandpaper and just try and smooth it out and get it a bit more even and precise. Okay, there's one side more or less how I want it to look. Now I just need to do the same to this side. That's basically it for the shape and the sanding for now. I'm going to do a wet and dry sand on it, but now I need to work on the wingtips because I want to get the wingtips looking the same as this one. So I mean, that's a pretty simple process. Basically just put some sandpaper down like this and then just work on doing a similar thing on each tip. Back to 400. I actually want to try and sand the top side of these tips down a bit. I remembered that I did this on this foil here, just like decreasing the thickness at the very tips. So I want to sand this one a little bit on the top side. All right, I've thinned out kind of enough. I'm going to move back to 400 again for some more hand sanding. Just trying to round off the ends now so it's kind of a smooth tip. So we're about even on the tips now. Looking pretty nice. I just need to do the wingtips now. I'm going to blunt those because this is, for me, it's too dangerous being sharp like this. I'll make it more look like this. So as you can see, I put a pretty similar angle on both tips. Now I'm just going to try and smooth that out a little bit. I think I'm going to go wet it down and then wet and dry sand it. Alright, it's wet now, so just a nice bit of wet and dry. Try and smooth it out as much as you can. Some people have some really special sanding techniques for their foils, and it does make a difference, honestly, if you're trying to go super fast. But if you get the thing smooth enough for kite foiling purposes and most purposes, it's going to be fine. Just going to go wet it again. So that's basically as much as I can be bothered doing. If you have a look, it's not a bad job, honestly. There's maybe a few spots that I can see that could be slightly more symmetrical, but overall, I'm pretty happy with that result. I'm gonna leave it like this and test it out first, see how it rides. I really wanted to test it against this one. This one has some flex. This one has a lot less flex. So it'll be interesting to see these two wings that are almost the same shape. See how they go. Right, that's it, guys. Hope that helped you figure out how to chop something down and make a wing yourself. It's a pretty simple process if you've got an old wing lying around that you want to do it with, so I really do suggest giving it a go. It's interesting to see what happens, and it's nice just to try something different. I feel like this process is, you know, maybe even some of the funnest parts for me. So yeah, if you got any questions, hit me up in the comments. I'm gonna go ride this thing now, see how it is. Peace.